And this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want me to facilitate the Q&A. Okay, yeah.
Then we'll take the other back.
Yeah.
Well, first I'll identify as I'm one of the elders. And I'm a Southerner. And I'm a product of the civil rights movement, so my perspective is flavored by that. But I want to piggyback on something I just heard you say, but an observation is that, first of all, we are a privileged group in this room.
That's right.
Privilege in class is very
Absolutely.
important, and a
Yes,
very
it is.
important phenomenon that must be integrated very well into this dialogue.
Yes.
You can't separate it,
That's right.
because that influences a lot of dynamics.
Yes.
Part of what I see in this culture, and part of what has happened is, as affirmative action has created an opportunity for a number of people of color in this country to move up the economic ladder, which further separates the opportunity for dialogue and creates more class
Yes.
divisions and lines.
That's right. I
Okay?
agree with you.
And has been a salve, if you will.
Yeah.
Money, economics.
Yeah.
You look at
Yeah.
our entertainers, our athletes. Where are they in these dialogues? Those are structures and formats and opportunities for
Yeah.
additional dialogues.
Yes, yeah.
Okay? And I want to point out one structure that I think is woefully dangerous, and that's the church. The dialogue between Christians and Muslims is a dialogue that needs to heat up
Yeah.
and go someplace quickly, because we are at risk on this globe if we don't do that. And the dialogues that we're having now will be meaningless if we don't address what is, I think, the next major issue that will capture race, and culture, and economics.
And
Stop
do you see that as particular within the church? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think the church, there are a number of Christians who have the church, and I am a Christian and active in the church.
Yeah.
What I see is the church has not progressed and changed its message and been embracing change
Yeah.
and created different messages and different dialogue and different ways to be and exist.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is too traditional and stuck.
Yeah.
And a strong example of that is its attitude and opinions about homosexuality.
Yes.
I'll stop there.
Yeah.
And mass incarceration
Mass
hasn't
incarceration,
been
yeah.
spoken for very much. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll collectively react to after we get her.
Oh,
opinion.
sure. Yeah.
So, you struck a nerve a few sentences ago, and I lost my train of thought, but I wanted to say that we have to answer the call to teach. If we're gonna dismantle anything collectively and heal as a people,
Yeah.
we cannot close the door and let ill-prepared communities and forces and people educate an entire generation of our children. Because their their hearts are in the right place, they're well-intentioned, but they're answering a corporate call to standardize everything.
Yes, they are.
And our history is not included in a standardized test. So if they're going to learn it, they have to learn it in the institution that we call school. And there are far too many black and brown faces in the field of education. And even if it's only 3 years, and in your second year you're mentoring and pulling a friend and say, come on, you got to do 3, then it gets a pipeline going. And it gets that validation in the classroom. So at least the knowledge is getting sprinkled in through that lengthy, boring school day.
And I think if you look back at the civil rights movement, what you'll see is that people started informal groups outside of the formal structures.
Community schools.
They created community schools
Freedom
and study
schools.
groups, and I would suggest that that is going to be much more valuable on both sides of the Atlantic, and that it's up to this younger generation who have this opportunity to know each other, and you have many allies in other ethnic communities, to create centers of discussion
Yeah.
in Africa and here that helps people place themselves in the world. You know, because, you know, you go to Africa, people, America, yeah, how did it get there? The Africans built, you know, half of what's here. And now you're mystified by America and you feel like it's something that you have no relationship to. So I think on both sides, if I may, people have to remember who their great-great-grandparents were, and even beyond. You were talking about kids. People have to realize that their actual, this is what I've seen, their actual relatives came from Africa, not everybody, but somebody was actually a person who got on a boat, who was actually their own ancestor in Virginia. or South Carolina, those first generations were Africans. That's what African Americans are traumatized not to think about. You know, so it's a healing. It's a
Absolutely.
these kind of small groups where people can discuss.
And those are other institutions that we can create.
Hmm.
Our freedom schools, our discussion circles.
That's right.
I think there's
Yeah, lady.
there.
Jane.
So I have a question about, you touched on this when you talked about the deterritorialization of African Americans. But can you kind of explore the idea of privilege around African Americans, if you think that that is something that plays a role in the separation? Because
The idea of privilege.
privilege around African Americans that do live in the United States and are in a country that is like a global power, for example. So
You mean that African Americans who are in a position of privilege because they're in the United States, or they
yeah.
feel privileged?
are in a position of privilege because they live in the United States and they are American. They have a passport that allows them to travel around the world. They come from a country that, you know, if you're applying for a job anywhere and you're an American person, you just tend to have a higher status. And so I feel it maybe that the separation of African American people comes from the fact that countries like Jamaica in the Caribbean or Nigeria or Ghana, those are just in the global context tend to be less powerful. So, like, do you think that plays a role in the division between the different communities?
Yes, I think that, as we said earlier, African Americans don't have the same mechanisms that they used to have to talk about their political position in this country. Now everything is be a good soldier, be a good citizen, make everybody love you, show them how good you can be, when there used to be a much different dialogue happening in the African American community. However, I don't think we can talk about African Americans in a blanket statement. For 50% of African Americans, they have never rested. That's what people don't realize. Poor African Americans have never rested from the moment their ancestors came to this country. And I'll give you an example. That's my great-grandfather, that picture right there. Unfortunately, that's not an accident. That's the truth of class. And I'm prepared to admit that 50% of African Americans have never had a break. So those are not the people you're talking about. They do not feel lucky. This is a nightmare for 50% of African Americans. Now you have another 40% who, because of very tiny advantages, have been able to scrape up the funeral directors, the barbers, the people who worked in the black colleges. Those people have a national, African Americans, W.B. Du Bois said it, we got an identity crisis. We are Americans, but when we're in America, we're only black. So, and to me, African Americans have a very tenuous citizenship situation. We're like citizens on probation, always.
Yeah.
So, with that mentality, people don't even see the opportunities that are in front of them. See, it's clearer for somebody who's coming from outside. I want that. I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
But the people who've been here have been constantly battered with this idea that, I haven't quite made up my mind. You're kind of interesting, but we're just not sure yet. And so this is really destabilized. I mean, you're right in the larger picture.
Yeah.
But no, those conversations aren't really happening as they used to when you had Eric Williams and you had Stokely Carmichael from Trinidad, and you had these other people who were active in the black community talking about these kind of contradictions.
We have someone over there.
Oh, and someone in the back too.
Oh, okay.
Can she go first?
Yeah.
Yes, I want to say I feel lucky to be here, and thank you both for having us. My question, you both talked about, I think that the theme here is the importance of education, and you both talked about educating the systems and the world that we live in. How do you educate institutions that sometimes is either racism or discrimination or not being wanted, is obvious or not obvious? without coming across as an angry black woman.
Without coming across as an angry black woman. Well, I feel like we have a lot to be angry about. And so I think that we understand that label as being one that's meant to silence. And so that we understand that, and that we continue to voice, push back, articulate. I think that when we're in institutions, that institutions are set up to function a particular way. So they are not designed to always value and honor who we are. That's not the way institutions are set up. They're not set up to do that. That's not their interest. And so I feel like if we understand that and we're clear about that, we can have strategies that where we feel like we are engaging with these systems on our own terms.
Yeah, that's right.
And I feel like that is it's a moving, it ebbs and flows, right? Sometimes it's easier than others, and we have to pick our battles, sort of thing. I don't mean to say that we compromise on our values and our principles, but I think we have to be clear that institutions are not designed for us. And the angry black this and are silencing mechanisms. We have a lot to be angry about. We don't have to burn everything down, but we have a lot to be angry about. And I want you to know that I'm angry about that. And I'm going to write a paper about why I'm angry about that. And I'm going to push back on this lecture about some of the inaccuracies of your lecture about this. That I'm angry. That's how I'm going to show my anger. I'm not going to burn the classroom down, but I'm going to push back against. Do you know what I'm saying? So we have a lot to be angry about. I am an angry black woman. I just want to say it. I'm an angry black woman.
I guess just kind of picking back off of what she said, I know you talked about institutions, but what about the corporate culture? You know, I think diversity and inclusion is always a hot topic, I think, in corporations.
Yeah.
But, and sometimes they make the effort with diversity, but inclusion is really, really hard.
Yes.
I work in a corporate office where it's, I'm one of maybe one on my floor. In my division, it's like 2 of us, you know what I mean, out of like 300. And I feel it so strongly, and I've had those conversations with my direct manager, and he's a white male, and he always says to me that he can't really relate to what I'm saying, and the conversation kind of stops there. And it's a hard conversation to have when you're the only one like that, and people have been in the company for 15, 20 years, and they don't want to see a change.
Yes.
So what does that look like?
Can you make, following what she was saying, can you, for example, find allies among your white colleagues
What's funny
to
is
ask for training and microaggression?
you find them, but even they talk to you almost in secret. They'll say,
Yeah.
meet me here,
Yeah.
back over here. It's funny because I found some who will support and understand me, but they don't go to bat for me.
Right, because they don't want to upset it for themselves, right? They're about preserving their own sort of white privilege within those institutions. I feel like this is really hard, what you're talking about. It isn't just in corporate America, but it's also in our nonprofits. It's in our universities. This idea of just like most of our nonprofits and corporate cultures is all about like a white dominance culture, and it's really, really difficult
It's scary.
to change that.
I think that you're called upon to either be very cynical or go play the part, get the money, and then be another person later on that day and on the weekends, or to seriously consider ways that you can build a community that brings in training, because what they basically need is training, and whoever those managers are, ironically, are not the top managers, because this is the funny gap that's happening in the States right now. The very top managers are looking for people with cultural competence. They understand that this is what the future is. But it's the people in the middle who, very often, who haven't gotten the message yet and who resist and who make it hard. So I agree with her. It's not easy.
I can give
There
you my
are
contact
ways,
information if
but-
you want. I have some ideas and some strategies you might be able to use.
Wendy,
Yes.
you mentioned earlier in your presentation something we've lost.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. We forgot about you. Go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
the partnerships and coalitions that were part of the civil rights movement, and that we've lost that phenomenon
Yeah.
in our present.
Yeah.
How do we get that back? You know, when I look at this room and I see generational differences, you know, I see these young people in the room. I'm 66 years old. You know, partnering with a younger generation is a challenge as well,
Sure.
because our perspectives are different. But those partnerships are essential because this is our future.
Yes.
So I guess I'm putting out there that challenge of is how do we bridge these
Yeah.
gaps and come back to those kinds of relationships that move us all forward.
Does everybody hear this? Okay, so there you go,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
One is that we put it out there that we need to do that.
Yeah.
And we're in the space where
Yeah.
that can actually start to happen right now.
Right.
And I think our this lately,
Yeah.
for the last 20 years, the type of education that people have been receiving has not served them well.
Yes.
So very often people think in terms of absolutes.
Mhm.
They have not been taught how to think in nuance.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
And somehow we've
Right.
got to get back to that because
Yeah.
I was, you know, in a class the other day and I was saying, which was about 80% white. I said, never think that white people were not there helping African Americans since the beginning.
They elected Obama.
Right. And so the problem is not that the white people weren't there, but that the other white people have silenced those white people.
Yeah.
But, you know, to just even encourage the white students, don't think that you are outside of the story. You know, so,
Yeah.
but even they and the black students have grown up thinking that in absolutes, the black people did the civil rights all on their own. It's a black problem.
Yeah.
The black people are going to have to solve that. I don't
Yeah.
know. But I think the kind of work, for example, that Trina is doing is so essential because she's out there in
In the trenches.
the trenches.
Well, in many ways, we all are.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Different ways.
Lived experience, yeah.
I just wanted to also share with you, the panelists, how I was having a conversation with a group of students before it started, and they were all African students, and you know, one was sharing with me how the same thing about, you know, you come to the U.S., you're not sure, you know, would they accept me? You know, I don't feel accepted and things like that by people from African American. From the African American community, and for me it was, as you know, as someone coming from Nigeria, I felt that way. And then I was doing my master's in public policy, and my professor said to me, if you want to be engaged in any kind of policy work in the U.S., you have to take a class on racism. You just have to. And so I did a class, and the history, the background information I got totally changed my perspective about America and African Americans. So I'm just like imploring students from the diaspora, get involved, get in there, take a class, or come for things like this. And you know, it would help you close the divide of, I don't really understand them, they don't really understand me. It will close that divide. And now I feel, I felt bad for all the stereotypes I had carried in my head, about all the presumptions I had made. You know, I felt really, it was really life-changing for me, you know. So now I feel like I'm more aware, I'm more engaged, you know, about these issues. So that's my call to students from diaspora, from Africa, from the Caribbean, from Haiti, anywhere. Take a class in American history. It would help you understand.
You know, the other thing that's kind of encouraging is, who's this guy who wrote, I'll be gone till September, I'll be gone till November.
Blackness.
Yeah. In spite of all of our intellectual discussions, there's also this informal meshing that's really interesting, like with Wycliffe. And I'm thinking about, for some of you may know some of the people I'm talking about, Sid the Kid. Tyler the Creator, and Earl, whose father I knew as a poet in New York, Willie Hosisile. So there are these informal things happening and borrowings between, and even a debate and a discussion among young people that we're not as privy to about these different interesting matches that are happening. There's a young Somali musician in New York. I can't think of his name. Azza, his sister, was in my class. There's a lot of in film and music. There's a lot of marriage of people from different diaspora and African positions. I think that we can't see. So
yeah, what I really appreciate about what you just shared is that I feel an enormous amount of hope for us as Black people, and I think as an African American, Black immigrants to this country give me a lot of hope for us as a Black community, because I think that our entire community, I think it expands our liberation movement and our work as Black people, and I think that I think when Black people are really connecting across all these differences, it's a really beautiful, powerful thing, and I think that has huge implications for just for our future as Black communities in the U.S. I'm like really, I'm like excited, I'm jazzed, I'm curious to connect with people. I don't mind saying, I really don't know, or I have a question, or I've never been there, so you're going to have to talk to me about, what's going on. And I feel like if we can encourage that mutual curiosity about each other in the spirit of Black love, I feel like the transformation is limitless and what it can have for our world. And so I'm just really, really heartened and committed to it. And I just love Black people. I don't really care where you're from. I love Black people. And so...
I want to say, too, that especially to the younger people who are either kids of recent immigrants or immigrants themselves, you may not even see the impact that you're making just by your presence. And I'll just give you a small example. Not too long ago, in this country, whites thought they knew Black people. So much so that we had a comedian, Flip Wilson, who used to say, "You don't know me." But now whites can't make those assumptions. When they walk down the street, they don't know who you are. They don't know if your relatives were from South Carolina or South Africa. And that is good for white people. That's good for them. It's making white people think about diversity within race. And that, unfortunately, is new in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So just the presence of African immigrants puts people on notice.
I think it was a question, outstanding question.
Oh, really? Okay.
So,
You have to introduce yourself first.
I'm Jemadari Kamara. I'm on the faculty at UMass Boston, and I'm currently acting as chairman of the Africana Studies Department, and I'm director of the Center for African, Caribbean, and Community Development. And I'm the former treasurer of WARA, and I really would like to commend WARA for hosting this conversation. And I really appreciate the way in which you have generated this dialogue that I feel needs to be a continuous kind of conversation, and that this is one of those points in that conversation that I think can enrich us all. And particularly the multiple levels of intervention that you've discussed, because in that engagement among us, the follow-up has to continue at multiple levels. And there are a couple of comments I'd like to make in relationship to that, because you spoke about this question of statelessness. This past week, Hillary Beckles was here.
Oh, wow.
Besides Wendy, anyone know Hillary Beckles? Anyone? Homework. Sorry. Everyone should know Sir Hillary Beckles. He is well-known historian from the Caribbean, he's from Barbados, currently the Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. Academic credentials. One of his most recent books is called Britain's Black Debt. So Hillary is now the chairperson of the CARICOM Commission that was set up in 2014 under the leadership of the prime ministers of the CARICOM countries, that has now established a commission on each of the Caribbean islands focused on the issue of reparations.
Wow.
In April of last year, the Caribbean Reparations Commission came to the United States and held a meeting in conjunction with the Institute of the Black World. And there has now been formed a National African American Reparations Commission. In November, there was an international conference held in the University of Edinburgh, where Sir Hillary spoke. And there were representatives from many of the European countries, France, Germany, Netherlands, all over Europe, who came to this meeting to discuss this issue of reparations. And Obama or no Obama, people of African descent here are powerless as it comes to the control of the state. And it is not until those who control state power, who are of African descent, have now raised the issue of reparations or the process of repairing that which occurred through the Ma'afa, that this is now being raised to a global level. Our relationship as a collective people to power is fundamentally different. When in some of my classes, several of my students are really pleased to see who are out here now and working with the Africans in Boston and so forth, and I'm glad to see you here as well. But in several of the classes, I begin the class, they know that, first day of class. We introduce ourselves. Everyone introduces himself. After you give me your name, rank, and serial number, I want you to share with us what is your race, your ethnicity, and your citizenship. Now, these are issues you touched upon in various ways, but it is a conversation, first of all, that the vast majority of us don't have with ourselves, much less to share that with someone else or even think about ourselves in that relationship. Several of the most interesting comments have come from, there was one brother from Haiti and actually another brother from Nigeria. Brother from Nigeria said, you know, I am Igbo by ethnicity. I'm a Nigerian citizen and I became black when I came here. And there was another student, I think she was from Bosnia, Slovenia, who said, I am Slavic by ethnicity, from Bosnia. I became white when I came to the U.S. And it is the nature of the construct that we find ourselves in here that raises a certain set of contradictions that is unique and different, particularly from those who may be from Brazil or Panama or Cuba
Or Morocco.
or Morocco or Nigeria. It's different. The sets of contradictions. And so when one comes here, one is placed into a construct in which there are different sets of primary or secondary contradictions, and we don't perceive of it that way. And so there's this disjuncture. You spoke about this issue of class, brother. I think that's very important, the class relationships. And in the conversation, the complexity of our responses must also engage the complexity of those issues that we're dealing with in a continuous way. I would hope that we just had a brief conversation that perhaps following this, there can be a way, maybe in the fall, that we begin to come together across our institutions and our academic departments with folks from the community and AIB and the Boston Pan-African Forum in other ways to continue this, because it has to be a continuous process and engagement. We have to engage, as Sister talked about, the content of curriculum in school, but also out of school, after school, Saturday, to open up this kind of dialogue and engagement with ourselves, with our brothers and sisters, to make the bridges that are necessary to build for our future. So I really commend you for this. I'm gonna
Thank you.
I think Jemadari pretty much said it all. I don't know if anybody wants to react to what he just said. If anybody had any kind of light bulb moments or
Somebody back
aha
there.
moments.
Also back there
Oh, yeah.
afterwards.
I came in this country with a lot of misunderstanding of Black America. I had a personal beef with a scholar at Fisk. He traveled to Africa, Tanzania, had a bad experience with some of the villagers and came back. And it's the way he portrayed Africa really bothered me, because just because you have a bad experience in one country, you don't have to collapse everyone in the same. So my question is, how do we have a multi-generational dialogue to bridge the gap? Because when you're talking about African diaspora, you got to keep in mind the Black community in France and Paris. I got families over there. It's a conversation that we have. I have a lot of people connected back in the continent because I was blessed to grow up between Gabon and Congo, interact with different Africans. So it's very complex. It's not quite easy because Africa is 54 countries, 3,000, and the multi-generational dialogue is this: what's the recipe? What's the key here? I know we have to keep the dialogue going. And when I advocate on a conflict in the Congo, people look at me like I'm crazy. But when I educate, it makes sense, because I'm an activist. So what's the recipe to have a multi-generational dialogue? Keep in mind that the cultural differences is there, the language barrier is there. When I came here, I told them, like, listen. They told me, like, oh, when you go to America, say what's up to Janet Jackson. Because hip-hop is how we view Black America. But so much misunderstanding on both sides, and it's deep. But the next generation, the young people, it's just that there's this gap that it's tough to address,
Excuse me. He's not, no, see, I'm not going to let him off. He's not being fair. See, because he didn't come with everything. Afro Blue. Come on, why don't you share with them what you do and how you've taken some steps to do that? And you want to share something with us?
We'll have...
Come on, come on.
Anybody else, is it okay if other people have things that they're doing that you want us to know about? Please share also.
And there was somebody over here that would
Yeah.
like to speak later.
Okay, great.
Okay,
Yes.
real quick. The only thing we wanted for our country was the right to a decent existence, to independence without restriction, to dignity without hypocrisy. The day will come when history will have its say. Patrice Lumumba. Where is Operation Congolese Freedom? Where Uganda soldiers have engaged in gang rape and hauling down naked hundreds of Congolese women to slice off their breasts and sex organs. Where is Operation Congolese Freedom? When Eastern Congo, Bunia, over 200 bodies were discovered on the streets, mainly women and children, and some were decapitated, and others with their hearts livers, and lungs ripped out. And the massacre becomes a way of living, where women have lost their arms and legs. So welcome to the Congo, known as the rape capital of the world, where over thousands of women were raped every month, all because a cell phone, a laptop, a high phone. You see these cell phones contain mineral that we call coltan, C-O-L-T-A-N, coltan, C-O-L-T-A-N, coltan, a mineral that help produce electronic devices in the Western U.S. And 80% of coltan come from the Congo, where children have been kidnapped and told to dig for coltan in Congolese mines with their fingers. So foreign investors can exploit them illegally with the help of African rebels. And these rebels in return use rape and violence as a weapon of war. And as a result, over 6 million of Congolese have died during the Congolese war. But since you barely get to hear this on the news, welcome to the Congo, Africa's second largest country, one of the most mineral-rich and overlooked country in humanity. My beloved origin, I was blessed to escape the war at 16, but the war never took the Congo out of me. So to my friend, when I crack jokes about Congo that, Congo this, Congo that, it's because underneath the laughter I cope with agony of pain. Imagining Congolese women taking showers in rivers of blood and asking folks around the world, does your cell phone have blood on it? Does your laptop have blood on it? Because rape out of a Congolese woman's face, so you and I can enjoy texting and play Candy Crush in the Western U.S. So how does that cell phone connected to the genocide in the Congo? Should we call Verizon, T-Mobile, Apple? Nah, but I decided that I'm going to refuse to hate. Because I can't afford to hate. Because my soul has evolved against all type of hate. Because you can never fight hate with hate. But as the blind in this modern days, where human beings fight violence with violence or confusion with division, I decided to fight hate with love. Call me insane, but you see, love indeed defeat hate. So Mother Africa, I have no choice but to love you and to love. So God can be the anthem of my soul. Long live the Congo. Long live Patrice Lumumba. Nelson Mandela, Tata Madiba. Long live Africa.
There was somebody back here.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Sorry, my joints just start hurting. The older you get, it just start hurting. But that was beautiful. I wanted to ask, because I know we were talking about like the older generation and like my generation. I go to UMass Boston. Hope I'll be finishing soon, and I have 2 daughters. And what I heard you mention, I heard you mention about a lot about like African American and Africans, how we view each other. And as a Ghanaian American, I kind of know how that is, because growing up in the 80s and 90s, I grew up in Detroit and then the South. So I had that experience of course, racism, but also the Afrocentric viewpoint. And I know you mentioned about like ideology. You give a child ideology, but like if you got to give them something sustainable. So let them know like they're beautiful. Growing up, I grew up in like the generation where like children should be seen and not heard. And if you were heard, you were beaten. And so therefore, you were given this African perspective. Generally, it was like mysticized. Like you go to Africa, all your problems go away. My mother taught me different, but still, you see what you see. Then I had to deal with what was on TV. Africans, of course, we were all ashy, violent, living in the bush backwards. And so growing up, I did not like myself as a child. So now that I have daughters, I'm trying to find out various ways of art and through various avenues of how can I let them know that they're beautiful and they're black as young black women, because when I try to get my daughter into like various Ghanaian things or the African things, and she does good, like she likes Dr. Stubbins or whatnot, but then like she'll see something like on TV like that show Disney Snow or something, Frozen, there we go. And then she'll see that, and then later on she'll be like, I'm ugly, Daddy, I'm like, why you said it? Because my hair is nappy, I'm brown. I'm like, and it's just like, so how do we like really deal with that? Because if my daughter grows up and if people like me, like us, don't do something as African Americans and Africans, they're going to go into a world where
we're going to be hating each other like, oh, black Americans are trifling and lazy, from what I hear on one side, and then on the other side, Africans are just violent and crazy and backwards. And, you know, and if they grew up with a white power structure that says, you know, your beautiful standard is blonde hair, blue eyes, you know, and a slim figure, it's like, it's like a battle. So I just want to know, like, for children, because if we don't start with our children, everything else we're trying to do won't mean anything, because they'll just go up to hate themselves.
I would like to chime in first and say that I think we need to create more social networks, clubs, social clubs. I know that a lot of immigrants create social clubs according to their nationality or their ethnicity. But it might also be time for us to create clubs across ethnicities of people of like mind. You know, for years, African Americans created all kinds of clubs just for that reason, so that they could have little parties for their daughters and say, you look beautiful, or have a party that we cook good food for everybody. Those things those kinds of institutions have to be consciously created and maintained. So wherever you live, if you can find people who are of different African descent backgrounds, because that will automatically help your children see that those different kinds of people can be respected. I think that might be one of the things that would help. And then, of course, whenever you can travel, or if you have people from different places, because sometimes if you have a child if you have a third place, it makes it easier. I'll just say, one of my children will say, you don't have to tell me that I was born in Senegal. I know already. I was born in Senegal. But there's so many things that he doesn't know because he's growing up here now. So what is good sometimes is to put him with a Malian or a Ghanaian so he doesn't feel the challenge of showing how much he knows about Senegal, but still getting reinforced. Do you see what I mean? So sometimes you can do things like that, just.
Yeah, I completely agree with that too. And I don't have kids. I have nieces and nephews, but I'm not raising kids as a parent. So, but I know that as a black woman, growing up, not liking what I look like either, and feeling like I was ugly and all this other stuff. And there is lots of efforts right now to make sure that we get books with written, with characters, beautiful black characters written for kids, and there's a movement.
Illustration is very important. I think as a young kids, when we were younger,
Yeah.
I was always black when I was young, so the book. But then as I started to build, I have a son, and so like I show up in the book like Jonathan and his mom and Kevin and his dad.
Yeah.
It's beautiful illustrations of black children, black people,
Yes.
things like that, and that really helps.
That is important. So one thing we can do in these informal social networks is read those books together.
That's right, to children.
And parents get together and read books with their kids and then talk about those stories. So these are the kind of informal institutions that we can create for ourselves. We don't need large institutions. We can do that for ourselves.
Can I intervene here
Yeah.
for a moment? I know this is about Africans and the diaspora, but it's really important that white children read those books too.
Yes.
White children need to see, they need to see beautiful black children. They need to see black leaders in their schools. They need to see black teachers. Otherwise, the power structure that is pushing is not going to be able to release until our children can see this world too.
You're doing
In the
well.
spirit of Kuumba, I have a 14-year-old who is very disconnected from what it means to be African. In some ways, as he should be. He was born here, right? It's a very confusing dichotomy. But I've started making earrings with him. So the symbol is like making sure he's listening to me, And his job is to just twist the metal. He's got the tools. So he's doing the craftsmanship while I am creating these lovely art rings. Each one is unique. And I've told him that he can get $5 off of each sale. So there's a little incentive for him. But during the course of this Kuumba session, we're getting down to some things that he's just not learning, and the messages that are being, providing some psychic wounds for him, basically unteaching, and also creating in the true African style. We made things beautiful. We made things out of what was in the house. So it's not always me going out to the store getting things. It's like, those beads are ugly, let's cut them apart and upcycle them. So that's a small way that I'm trying to teach my son to be proud of who he is, despite the messages that he receives on a daily basis that his life has no value.
I think we really need to have some kind of age group thing going.
Age group thing.
For boys and girls.
Well, and then we also need the intergenerational. It seems like that's what people are asking for, is how do we create intergenerational networks?
So,
And this brother in the back also had his hand up.
so I'm Nigerian. I work for NigerianInvestors.com. And another thing that I've realized that actually helps with the intergenerational, differences is the business opportunities. Like, a lot of people, even African Americans, don't realize, like, if you go on Forbes, the wealthiest black person is Aliko Dangote, who's in Nigeria. And those things help them, like, just, accumulate a desire to learn more. I mean, just on the business standpoint. As, like, yes, you can make it very far in America, but still, I don't know if it's coincidence or what, but the wealthiest black person's still in Africa. So.
Okay, so one more reaction?
Yeah, so this is interesting. I am graduating from Northeastern University. It's really sad because I had to literally essentially start over when I got here.
Okay.
So,
you mean with your educational?
Yeah, but
okay.
It's good, I guess. No experience is the worst.
Okay.
And I've had the pleasure of actually, because I was at UMass before, and I learned directly from Professor Kamara, amazing, and all the other rebels at that department. And also I'm a member of the Africans in Boston. I think that I've been to a whole lot of, dialogues and exchange like this, and great ideas are exchanged, and then after the fact, it's like everything disappears into thin air. And one of the things that I will be trying to, probably take on as a project is this concept of intergenerational dialogue.
Great.
Because what and he emphasized that. I mean, I once took a course with one of my professors, Professor Noruddin, and he was really, you could see the frustration and the fact that he is a resource, and an amazing resource indeed. And you have these tons of black people and they don't even talk to him. So, and that's the thing. I think that it will be really interesting to take up as a project to work on, trying to create a platform for this kind of intergenerational dialogue, where the elders are connected to the kids, because within Nigerian history and African history, I like to talk about the little place I come from, because I'm not an expert in Africa. There is like, a continuous form of mentorship that goes on. So when kids grow up, they are connected to the past, as far as you can possibly remember. And I think that during the time of the civil rights movement and all, before because the advantages of affirmative action it's been amazing, but then part of the disadvantage is disconnect that you mentioned. Now, how do we begin to rectify that? So I look forward to working on something like this, and I putting this out there if there's anyone in the
Great. Thank you for
that
taking
want
action.
to,
Thank you.
so that would be great.
Any one of us can take action on any of the strategies, and I hope it's like I believe that the elders, as someone who's also aging, is the elders learn too. It's not just the younger generation that's learning. There's like a transfer up of knowledge and back of knowledge. Everybody's learning. Everybody's learning. So thank you for tonight. Hope you guys connect. And anybody else?
Just as a resource, my name is Vincent Licenziato, and I've created something that is uniquely Boston. It will be hopefully sponsored by the Howard Thurman Center soon. There's not enough to go around to everyone, but there is a website, and it's called emancipationtrail.org. And it creates dialogue about current events. It also teaches history about African American history. More importantly, though, it's America's story that the African American community exemplifies, which is a struggle for freedom, equality, and justice. So I do not teach African American history, I teach American history. So if you go to emancipationtrail.org, you'll find a draft of it, but hopefully it will soon be improved. But Ms. Kennedy has a number of copies, and I have a few here if somebody wants them.
Thank you. Thank you
Maybe
very
you
much
should
for
put it
that.
here.
He gets his, but he gets one because he's doing
All right.
the dialogue.
I think that we've passed the time that we promised you we would close, but it's been a very vibrant discussion, and I really want to thank Trina and Wendy for coming and sharing all this. It's, as Trina said, I'm sure it's not easy, and I want to acknowledge that. It's very, very thought-provoking, and hopefully it will have various results in actions that people will take. I want to thank the Howard Thurman Center again for hosting us and for giving us this very agreeable space to meet in. And again, to thank our co-sponsors, the African American Studies Program, the African Studies Center, Africans in Boston. Leonard, are you still here?
Yes. Beautiful.
He's the representative.
Great.
An African Students Organization. And finally, last but not least, to thank the Boston Cultural Council for supporting this kind of dialogue.
Great. Wonderful.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got some stuff up here.
Here's some free book, Bart, from my book.
Let's see how that went. Oh my God, Peter. Thank you.
Oh, should I ask?